Godzilla is not fiction. He's a documentary, a death certificate the size of a skyscraper. And the man who signed it was J. Robert Oppenheimer. In 1945, Oppenheimer watched his atomic bomb detonate for the first time and thought one line. 9 years later, Japan gave that death a face, a spine, and a scream. They called it Gojira. Every Godzilla film since has been the same warning nobody listened to. And in March 2024, that warning walked back onto the stage that created it. This isn't coincidence, it's a haunting. J. Robert Oppenheimer was the scientific director of the Manhattan Project. He built the bomb, and almost immediately, he tried to warn the world away from the thing he'd made. He wasn't afraid of one bomb. That's the mistake people make. Oppenheimer was afraid of a species-level force, a technology that outgrows the humans holding the leash. After the war, he stood in front of the US government and argued against developing the hydrogen bomb, the next weapon up, the one that would make Hiroshima look like a warning shot. For that, they destroyed him. In 1954, hold that year, it matters. His security clearance was stripped in a hearing that read like a public execution. The father of the atomic bomb branded a risk to the country he'd armed. He spent his final years watching the arms race accelerate past everything he'd begged it not to become. And he died in 1967 of throat cancer, the bomb's own imagery of fallout and rot written into his own body. Oppenheimer's real tragedy is that he was right, and being right didn't stop anything. The warning was ignored in real time by the exact people who had the most reason to listen. That failure, the warning that arrives, is understood and changes nothing, is the emotional engine of every Godzilla film ever made. Here's what almost nobody connects. In 1954, the same year Oppenheimer was being silenced, the Monsterverse's Monarch was already 8 years deep into hunting exactly the kind of force he feared. Canon says President Truman quietly funded the organization back in 1946, the year after Hiroshima, to chase down giant, radioactive apex creatures the government wanted buried. Oppenheimer warned the world in speeches. Monarch was already digging for the proof in the dark. Two halves of the same fear, running on parallel tracks, and neither one could stop what was coming. On March 1st, 1954, at Bikini Atoll, the United States detonated Castle Bravo, the largest nuclear weapon America has ever tested. The scientists expected a certain yield. The bomb came in at roughly 2.5 times what they predicted, around 15 megatons. Put that in human terms. Hiroshima was 15 kilotons. Castle Bravo was 15 megatons, 1,000 times larger. The men who built it could not accurately predict what their own weapon would do. That is not a footnote. That is Oppenheimer's entire warning, made literal, in a single flash over the Pacific. And the fallout did not stay on the test range. 80-some miles away, a Japanese fishing boat called the Daigo Fukuryu Maru, the Lucky Dragon 5, was showered in radioactive ash the crew mistook for snow. Every man aboard fell ill. The boat's radio operator, Aikichi Kuboyama, died months later. Understand what this meant to Japan. This was a nation that had already survived the only 2 atomic bombings in history. And now, 9 years into a fragile peace, the bomb had reached out across the ocean and touched them again. Not in a war, but during a test. The nuclear age wasn't a memory. It was a permanent weather system. This is the exact moment Oppenheimer's abstract dread became a body count with names. The weapon had outgrown its makers, exactly as he said it would. Japan didn't need a theory anymore. It needed somewhere to put the terror. Now here's where the fiction rewrites the history in the most chilling way possible. In Monarch, Legacy of Monsters, Castle Bravo isn't a weapons test. Monarch has tracked an ancient predator through the Pacific, and they lure it into the open with uranium so the military can drop the bomb on it. For over a year, they believe they succeeded, that the biggest bomb America ever built had killed a god. And then a device pulls him back to the surface, alive, unbothered, and a Monarch operative delivers the line that defines the whole universe. We didn't kill it. Jesus Christ, we didn't kill it. The real Castle Bravo terrified Japan into creating Godzilla. The fictional Castle Bravo is where Godzilla learned that our worst weapon was, to him, a snack. On November 3rd, 1954, 8 months after the Lucky Dragon 5, director Ishiro Honda released Gojira. And it was never a monster movie. Not to the people who made it, and not to the audiences who filed out in silence. Look at the creature itself. Godzilla's hide, those thick rope-like keloid ridges, was deliberately modeled on the scar tissue of Hiroshima survivors. The design team built the burns of real atomic victims directly into the monster's skin. When Godzilla walks through Tokyo, he doesn't smash it like a toy. He irradiates it. His atomic breath is a walking detonation. The cityscape he leaves behind is a keloid the size of a district, a wound, not a wreck. But the deepest cut in the 1954 film isn't the monster at all. It's a scientist named Dr. Serizawa. Serizawa invents a weapon called the Oxygen Destroyer, something so horrifying it could end Godzilla, and if it fell into the wrong hands, and far more than that. And Serizawa makes a choice Oppenheimer never got to make. He uses the weapon once to stop the monster, and then he burns every note, every formula, and takes his own life. So the knowledge dies with him and can never be built again. Serizawa is the anti-Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer built the weapon and had to live with it as it multiplied past his control. Serizawa builds the weapon and refuses to let it exist for even one day longer than the emergency requires. In 1954, Japan couldn't put the atomic bomb on trial. So it put a metaphor for the bomb on screen, and then dreamed up the ending it wished the real world had chosen. And that name, Serizawa, never leaves. 70 years later, in Legendary's Godzilla 2014, there's another Ishiro Serizawa, a Monarch scientist. His father, Eiji, was in Hiroshima on the morning of August 6, 1945, and he carried a pocket watch stopped forever at 8:15. The minute the bomb fell, he passed that watch to his son. The franchise built its most direct acknowledgement of the real bombing into a single prop, handed down across 2 generations of the same fictional family. Godzilla has never once let you forget where he actually came from. He just makes you look at a monster instead of a photograph. Here's the genius and the horror of Godzilla as a myth. He never says the same thing twice, and he never says anything new. Every era reskins the exact same warning to match the fear of its decade. Cold War Japan was terrified of escalation, so Heisei-era Godzilla became a nuclear proxy war on 2 legs. Fukushima happened, the 2011 earthquake, the tsunami, the reactor meltdown, a radioactive disaster you could not evacuate fast enough. And in 2016, Hideaki Anno's Shin Godzilla transformed the monster into exactly that. An unstoppable event and a government too paralyzed to act. Radiation you can't outrun. Then, in 2023, Takashi Yamazaki's Godzilla Minus One dragged it all the way back to the beginning. A broken post-war nation, a survivor drowning in guilt, and a Godzilla irradiated by the American atomic tests at Bikini. Different monster, same wound. And Legendary's Monsterverse took the metaphor and weaponized it into spectacle. Godzilla doesn't just survive radiation, he feeds on it, drawing power from the very thing that was supposed to kill mankind. Push him far enough and he goes thermonuclear, burning from the inside out. Push him further, like the radiation overload in Rome, and he evolves, his body remaking itself into something new. The bomb was supposed to be the end of us. In his story, it's his throne. That's why this franchise never dies. A monster tied to one fear ages out the moment that fear does. But Godzilla is tied to the permanence of the fear. The knowledge that we built something we can't fully control and can't put back. That knowledge never expires, so neither does he. For the real ones, here's a piece even hardcore fans argue about. There's an early Monsterverse tie-in comic called Godzilla Awakening, and it claimed that the 1954 bombing didn't just target Godzilla. It killed a second titan, a shadow creature called Shinomura, and dated Monarch's founding to August 1946. That comic has since been quietly decanonized, retconned right out of continuity by Monarch, Legacy of Monsters because its timeline no longer fits. But it's a fossil of an older version of this universe, where a single nuclear test woke up more than one god. And in the comic Godzilla, Aftershock, we learn Godzilla's own ancient species, the being's myth remembers as Dagon, was nearly hunted to extinction. Even the king of the monsters is a survivor of a near-extinction event, the apex predator, haunted by his own Hiroshima. Oh, and one more, for the people who think Monarch never showed their hand. In Godzilla, king of the monsters, their reinforced deep-sea headquarters has a code name, Outpost 54. Code name, Castle Bravo. They named their fortress after the bomb they dropped on him. Somebody at Monarch never stopped feeling guilty either. March 2024, the 96th Academy Awards. Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer, 3 hours about the man and the warning, sweeps the night. Best Picture, Best Director for Nolan, Best Actor for Cillian Murphy playing Oppenheimer himself, 7 Oscars in total. The warning finally at the very center of the culture. And on that same night, on that same stage, Godzilla Minus One wins Best Visual Effects. The first Godzilla film in 70 years of history to be nominated for an Academy Award, and the first ever to win one. A monster born from nuclear grief, made for a fraction of a Hollywood blockbuster's budget, standing at the same podium as the film about the man whose weapon created him. Think about the shape of that. 79 years after Oppenheimer watched the first bomb detonate at Trinity, the warning and the monster that warning created were honored in the same building, on the same night, by the same industry. The man who signed the death certificate and the creature Japan drew from it, sharing a room and applause. This is the moment the metaphor came home. Godzilla started as one nation's private way of processing an atrocity it couldn't say out loud. In 2024, the entire world stood up and applauded both halves of the story at once, the warning and the fallout, without most of the room realizing they were watching a circle close. And it is not over. The franchise isn't winding down, it's reloading. The next Godzilla warning is already coming, and it points upward, off this planet entirely, towards Space Godzilla, a version of the king twisted by radiation into something not of this Earth. The fear that started with one bomb in one desert is about to leave the atmosphere. And Monarch's own files, the redacted ones Bill Randa was carrying, the ones nobody's been allowed to read, suggest they've always known the bombs woke up more than they ever admitted. Oppenheimer spent the back half of his life trying to make humanity afraid of what we built, because he understood that the fear was the only leash we had. Godzilla is what happens when we forget to stay afraid. We are just getting started tearing this universe down to the bolts. Every Titan, every Monarch cover-up, every dark version of Godzilla you were never supposed to see. Subscribe right now because the next warning is already loaded and you are not going to want to hear about it secondhand.